Before you scroll, let me tell you something. There once was a woman who kept radioactive chemicals in her purse, who glowed in the dark, literally, who won 2 Nobel Prizes, and still couldn't get a seat at the table with the men. Her name was Marie Curie, and she changed medicine, science, and the world forever. So if you've ever felt like you didn't belong, or that you were underestimated, stick around. Hit that like, subscribe, and let's take a walk through the life of the most dangerous woman in science. You'll never look at glowing green the same way again. Let's begin. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone so brilliant, so stubborn, and so quietly unstoppable that they changed the world just by refusing to quit? Well, let me introduce you to Maria Skłodowska. You probably know her better as Marie Curie, the woman who discovered radium, pioneered X-rays, won not 1 but 2 Nobel Prizes, and then died because no one, including her, knew radiation was deadly. But before all of that, she was a teenager in Russian-occupied Poland, sneaking through the back doors of an illegal university, just to sit on a wooden bench and hear someone talk about science. Let's rewind. It's the 1860s Warsaw. Poland is swallowed up by the Russian Empire. Speaking Polish in school can get you punished. Education for girls is limited. Higher education for women, practically forbidden. But Maria, small, sharp-eyed, and intense, was the kind of girl who didn't care what was allowed. Her father was a math and physics teacher. Their house was full of books and curiosity, but also full of loss. By the time Maria was 10, she had buried her mother and one of her sisters. Grief shaped her, but so did grit. She studied, she watched, she waited. And then came the Flying University, an underground network of lectures taught in Polish, mostly by candlelight in private homes. Illegal, yes, but revolutionary. This is where Maria learned the foundations of science. Not just what to think, but how to ask questions the world wasn't ready for. Problem was, Maria was brilliant and broke. There was no money to study abroad and no way to legally study at home. So she cut a deal with her older sister Bronisława. Maria would work as a governess for a few years, sending money for Bronya's medical studies in Paris. In return, when Bronya got settled, she'd bring Maria over to France. Seems fair, right? But life didn't make it easy. Maria spent 6 years working for a wealthy family, tutoring their children, often treated more like a servant than a scholar. At night, she'd study physics textbooks under oil lamps, translating French words into Polish with the help of a smuggled dictionary. When her time finally came, she boarded a train to Paris with a stiff coat, a tiny suitcase, and enough money to rent an unheated attic. That attic? It became her first real lab. She enrolled at the Sorbonne, one of the only women there. She ate stale bread, slept with every blanket she could find, occasionally fainted from hunger, but still, top of her class in physics and mathematics. She had arrived. But here's the thing no one tells you about geniuses. They're often lonely. That's when she met Pierre Curie. Now, Pierre wasn't flashy, not rich, just a quiet, thoughtful physicist obsessed with magnetism and symmetry. He was, by most accounts, just as awkward and intense as she was, which in this case was perfect. Their courtship, mostly made up of scientific discussions and lab work. They bonded over crystal structures and electrometers, not exactly flowers and candlelit dinners, but it worked. In 1895, they got married. She wore a dark blue dress instead of white because she could reuse it for the lab. That pretty much tells you everything you need to know about Marie Curie. The world was changing. The late 19th century was electric, literally. X-rays had just been discovered. Physicists were beginning to poke holes in the idea that atoms were indivisible. The Curies were ready. They set out to explore a strange property called radioactivity, a term Marie herself would coin. Working in a leaky shed, they processed tons of black rock called pitchblende, trying to isolate something new, something glowing, literally, from inside the atom. They worked day and night. Boiling, grinding, sifting. The air stank of chemicals. Their clothes were permanently dusty. The lab had no ventilation, no gloves, no protection at all. But what they found would change science forever. In 1903, they were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. Marie became the first woman ever to win it. And yet, the French Academy didn't let her speak. Pierre did the talking. She stood silent beside him, glowing a little from the radium she carried in her pocket. Not metaphorically, literally glowing. And she was just getting started. Some love stories begin with roses and serenades. This one began with glass tubes, magnetic fields, and a shared passion for things that spark, spin, or glow under pressure. When Maria Skłodowska, now Marie, stepped into the Parisian world of academic science, she wasn't looking for romance. She had just survived years of struggle, a freezing attic, endless nights buried in formulas and meals that could hardly qualify as food. Her heart belonged to the periodic table. But then, quietly, Pierre Curie entered the picture. He wasn't the kind of man who dominated a room or commanded attention. In fact, his social skills were about as polished as the lab benches he worked on, which is to say, not at all. But beneath his quiet awkwardness was a deep, focused mind and a humility rare in the scientific world. Pierre had spent most of his life immersed in experimental physics. He had worked on piezoelectricity and magnetism, the kinds of things that rarely make headlines, but change the world all the same. He lived for precision, for symmetry, for the satisfaction of discovering patterns in nature's chaos. And when he met Marie, he saw in her a mind just as sharp as his, and far more determined. They began exchanging letters, notes, and ideas. At first, their relationship was purely intellectual, two kindred spirits orbiting the same questions. But in time, admiration turned into affection, and affection into a kind of partnership that neither of them had ever experienced before. They were equals, not just in love, but in pursuit of the unknown. In 1895, they married in a small civil ceremony. Marie wore a simple dark blue dress, not because it was fashionable, but because she planned to use it in the laboratory afterward. That detail alone says more about their relationship than any poem ever could. After the wedding, they moved into a modest apartment and soon welcomed their first daughter, Irene. But even parenthood couldn't distract them from the pull of science. They continued working together in a makeshift laboratory, a converted storeroom behind the School of Physics and Chemistry. The floor was cracked, the windows leaky, and the ventilation non-existent. But it was theirs, and it was enough. They were fascinated by a strange phenomenon that had just been discovered, a kind of invisible energy emitted by certain materials. Wilhelm Röntgen had called it X-rays. Henri Becquerel had noticed that uranium salts gave off something similar, but no one truly understood what was happening. The Curies decided to find out. They began studying a black heavy mineral called pitchblende, which appeared to be far more radioactive than the amount of uranium it contained could explain. Marie suspected it hid something unknown, a new element, or perhaps several. What followed was nothing short of scientific obsession. They processed nearly 10 tons of pitchblende by hand, crushing, boiling, stirring, crystallizing, over and over, in a space that lacked even basic safety precautions. No masks, no gloves, no lead shielding. They were surrounded by dust and fumes, unaware that the very thing they were chasing might also be slowly poisoning them. Eventually, through relentless trial and error, they discovered 2 new elements: polonium, named after Marie's beloved homeland, and radium, which glowed faintly in the dark. It was the kind of discovery that redefined physics and chemistry in one breath. Marie coined the term radioactivity and began charting its properties with a level of precision that left her peers speechless. Her meticulous records, her tireless experimentation, her refusal to rush, it all paid off. The Curies had found something no one else on Earth had seen, something that lived in the very bones of matter. Recognition soon followed. In 1903, the Nobel Committee awarded the Curies, along with Henri Becquerel, the Nobel Prize in Physics. It was a historic moment. Marie became the first woman ever to win a Nobel Prize. But even then, the press coverage focused more on her husband than on her. In some reports, she was barely mentioned. At the official ceremony, Pierre gave the acceptance speech. Marie stood beside him, dignified, quiet, and radioactive. Literally. She had begun keeping small samples of radium in her pocket, fascinated by their glow. No one yet understood the danger. No one imagined the long-term effects. They were too enthralled by the miracle of what they had uncovered. At first, the glow felt like magic. Imagine a tiny glass vial, sitting on a shelf, gently pulsing with a blue-green light. No wires, no flame, just silent energy, radiant, eternal, and mysterious. To Marie Curie, that glow wasn't just fascinating, it was beautiful. Proof that the universe still held secrets, that nature could shine in ways no one had imagined. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the light she found so mesmerizing wasn't harmless. It was killing her. After their Nobel win in 1903, the Curies became scientific celebrities. Invitations, lectures, awards. The whole world wanted to hear from the couple who had discovered invisible energy inside rocks. But Marie wasn't interested in fame. She didn't even attend the award ceremony in Stockholm at first. She just wanted to get back to work. And so they did. While Pierre handled most of the speaking engagements, Marie remained in the lab. Their work had only just begun. The applications of radium seemed endless: medical, industrial, even spiritual. Some called it liquid sunshine. Companies started putting radium in toothpaste, skin cream, and health tonics. It was a radioactive gold rush. But Marie and Pierre stayed focused on the science. In the lab, they handled radioactive materials daily. Marie kept radium salts in her pockets. She'd store glowing samples in her desk drawer, like a child keeping fireflies in a jar. At night, the light would dance across the walls of their home, a quiet, ghostly shimmer. They didn't wear gloves. They didn't use shielding. They didn't even suspect danger. And the signs, though subtle, had already begun. Fatigue, burns that didn't heal, persistent coughs. But both Curies ignored the symptoms. Their dedication, some might call it obsession, overruled common sense. Besides, they had another source of stress that would soon make everything worse. Pierre. He was exhausted. His health, like Marie's, was declining, though neither of them would admit it. The pressure of fame weighed heavily on him. He struggled with depression, insomnia, and physical weakness. He was brilliant, but fragile. Then, on a rainy afternoon in 1906, tragedy struck. Pierre was walking through the busy streets of Paris, lost in thought, likely on his way to a lecture. The street was slick with mud, the kind of spring drizzle that makes everything slow and gray. As he crossed the Rue Dauphine, a horse-drawn carriage came around the corner, too fast, the driver unable to stop in time. Pierre slipped. The carriage wheel crushed his skull. He died instantly. Marie, upon hearing the news, said nothing. She stood still, stared blankly, and returned to work the next day, wearing black, her hands trembling only slightly as she prepared solutions in the lab. She refused condolences, refused pity. She buried her grief inside equations. But the loss was unbearable. Pierre wasn't just her husband. He was her co-discoverer, her scientific partner, the only person who truly spoke the same language of thought and wonder she did. Without him, the lab felt empty. The glow of radium now flickered not with excitement but with sadness. And yet, she kept going. The Sorbonne offered her Pierre's teaching position, an unprecedented move. She accepted, becoming the first woman to ever teach there. On the day of her first lecture, students packed the auditorium, not because of curiosity, but to see if she would actually show up. She did. She walked to the front, laid her notes down, and began precisely where Pierre had left off in his final lecture. No dramatic speech, No tribute, just science, spoken clearly, defiantly, by a woman who had buried her husband and now stood alone in a man's world. Marie threw herself into her work with even more intensity. Her research on radium and radioactivity deepened, but so did her isolation. She was now a single mother, a widow, a scientist, and a teacher, all under the scrutiny of a public that admired her brilliance yet still questioned her place. The academic world offered praise but little warmth. Her colleagues respected her intellect, but never truly welcomed her. And still, she didn't stop. At night she returned to her darkened lab, surrounded by the faint glow of radioactive samples, a light she had summoned from stone and sacrifice. But now that glow came with a cost. Her fingertips cracked and bled, her joints ached, her eyesight blurred. The poison was slow, invisible, and relentless, and she carried it in her pocket every single day. Grief does strange things to the mind. It distorts time. It dulls the edges of reality. For Marie Curie, losing Pierre wasn't just the loss of a husband, it was the severing of a bond that had held together her identity, her work, her very sense of direction. And yet, she refused to pause. By day, she lectured at the Sorbonne, entering the classroom in her long black dress like a shadow from another world. Her voice was steady, her calculations flawless. She carried on as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. By night, she returned to the lab, where the ghost of Pierre seemed to linger in every corner. She poured herself into her work with a focus that bordered on self-destruction. She studied radium's effects on tissue. She mapped decay patterns. She took notes obsessively, even as her own health worsened. The burns on her hands darkened. Her fatigue deepened. Still, she did not rest. In the outside world, however, whispers had begun. You see, Marie Curie wasn't just a scientific pioneer anymore. She had become a symbol, a woman alone in the most male-dominated field in Europe, carrying radioactive substances in her handbag, delivering lectures to rooms filled with skeptics. People were watching her closely, and not all of them liked what they saw. Then came Paul Langevin. He was a physicist, like Pierre, brilliant, idealistic, and deeply involved in the world of electromagnetism. He had also been one of Pierre's former students, and like Marie, he was trapped, not by grief, but by a failing marriage and a growing sense of being misunderstood. Their connection began intellectually, as these things often do in the world of ideas. Letters became meetings. Meetings became conversations over wine and paper-cluttered desks. And soon, against their better judgment, the two scientists became lovers. But Paul was still legally married, and Paris in the 1910s was not forgiving. When their relationship was discovered, the reaction was swift and vicious. Langevin's wife released their private letters to the press. French newspapers exploded with scandal. Headlines painted Marie not as a Nobel laureate, but as a homewrecker, a foreign seductress, a threat to decency. They called her a Polish temptress. They accused her of undermining French values. One editorial even demanded she be deported. Marie was devastated. She had always preferred the silence of her lab to the noise of public opinion. But now her reputation, so carefully built, was crumbling beneath the weight of sexism and xenophobia. She was shunned at academic gatherings. Her letters to colleagues went unanswered. Even friends fell silent. And just when the storm seemed unbearable, another letter arrived, this one from Stockholm. It was official. Marie Curie had been awarded her second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for her work in discovering radium and polonium, and for isolating pure radium metal. Let that sink in for a moment. In the same year she was being crucified in the tabloids, Marie Curie became the first person in history, man or woman, to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences. Not Einstein, not Darwin, not Newton, Marie Curie. But instead of triumph, the moment was soaked in bitterness. When she arrived in Sweden to accept the prize, the committee politely suggested she avoid mentioning the scandal, or perhaps not attend at all. She attended anyway. She walked into the hall with her chin high, trembling slightly from illness and fury, and delivered a calm, composed speech that ignored every headline. She spoke only of science, her great love, her constant anchor. And in doing so, she reminded the world of something they had forgotten. She was not there to entertain them. She was there to change reality. After the ceremony, Einstein, who admired her deeply, wrote her a private letter. "Don't read that junk," he said. "People who have achieved something great should not let themselves be disturbed by the barking of fools." But the damage had been done. Marie returned to Paris more isolated than ever, physically broken, emotionally bruised, but still burning with radioactive intensity. Her next chapter would not be about scandal or awards. It would be about war. And she was about to become something no one expected, a battlefield hero. By the time the guns began to roar in the summer of 1914, Marie Curie had already reshaped the scientific world. But war doesn't care about Nobel Prizes. When empires collapse and trenches fill with mud and blood, even the brightest minds must find a different kind of purpose. So when France called its sons to the front, Marie Curie rolled up her sleeves and prepared for battle in her own way. She wasn't a soldier, she didn't carry a weapon, but she had something far more powerful than a rifle. She had X-rays. You see, in the years following her second Nobel Prize, Marie had become increasingly interested in the medical applications of radiation. She saw what others didn't, that this invisible energy could be used not just to study atoms, but to see inside the human body, not in theory, in practice. And as the First World War unfolded, the need became tragically obvious. Thousands of wounded soldiers were arriving at field hospitals with shattered limbs, embedded shrapnel, internal bleeding, and no way for doctors to see what was going on inside. Surgeries were done blindly. Amputations became the default. Marie Curie decided that was unacceptable, so she did something extraordinary. She began designing mobile radiography units, small truck-mounted X-ray labs that could be driven directly to the battlefield. With the help of mechanics, doctors, and engineers, she assembled the first fleet of what came to be known as Petites Curies, Little Curies. But Marie didn't just invent the machines, she drove them. Picture it, a woman in her 40s dressed in a mechanic's coat, hair tied back, bouncing along muddy roads in a converted delivery truck filled with glass tubes and radioactive sources, heading toward artillery fire. She wasn't alone. Her teenage daughter, Irene, trained under her, learning to operate the machines, develop the images, and assist surgeons in the field. Together, they became a force of precision and quiet courage. Marie taught over 150 women to operate X-ray equipment. She trained nurses, doctors, volunteers, many of them barely out of school, in a technology most hospitals hadn't even adopted yet. By the end of the war, more than 1 million wounded soldiers had been diagnosed using X-ray machines she developed. She saved lives. She saved limbs. She saved dignity. And yet none of it came easily. The early machines were delicate, heavy, and dangerously underprotected, handling radioactive elements in the back of a moving truck. Not exactly standard procedure. Marie often had to beg for funding, plead with officials, and fight bureaucratic ignorance at every step. Her health, already fragile, deteriorated further. Prolonged exposure to X-rays without shielding took its toll. But she didn't complain. She never had. When asked why she risked so much, she simply said that if her work could prevent a single unnecessary amputation, it was worth it. And so, she worked through the war, tirelessly, silently, sometimes sleeplessly, not in the pages of scientific journals, but in the makeshift operating rooms of army tents under candlelight, surrounded by the stench of blood and iodine. Few people knew. Few even noticed. When the war ended in 1918, France celebrated its generals. Statues were raised, medals pinned, but Marie Curie received no formal recognition from the French government for her wartime work. No parade, no plaque, just exhaustion and radiation sickness that worsened with each passing year. But she didn't seek applause. Instead, she returned to her true battlefield, science. With whatever strength she had left, she threw herself into building the Radium Institute in Paris, a place where scientists could work safely, where young researchers could learn without risking their lives, and where the promise of radioactive medicine could finally become reality. The institute would go on to train a generation of medical pioneers. It would house some of the earliest cancer research in Europe. It would become her legacy, not just as a physicist or chemist, but as a humanitarian, because Marie Curie understood something very few people did at the time. Science was not about glory, it was about service. By the early 1920s, Marie Curie had changed medicine, revolutionized physics, trained a small army of battlefield radiographers, and founded one of the most important scientific institutions in Europe. And yet, she could barely hold a pen. Her fingers were stiff and cracked. Her eyesight was fading. She was constantly fatigued, with an ache in her bones that no doctor could explain. But there was no mystery. The cause sat right on her desk. Radium, glowing faintly in a glass vial. Her friend, her enemy, her life's work. For over 20 years, she had handled radioactive material with no protection. No one had known better. Radiation didn't burn like fire. It didn't scream like gas. It moved silently through the body, altering cells, draining marrow, slicing lifespan by the day. Marie had devoted her life to unlocking its secrets, and now those secrets were slowly unmaking her from the inside out. But she refused to retreat. Instead, she focused all her energy on the Radium Institute, pouring herself into its labs, its mission, and most of all, its students. She believed deeply that science should be international, open, and equal. The Institute welcomed women researchers, offered medical training, and fostered collaboration across borders. She wanted it to be the opposite of the world that had once tried to shut her out. One of those students was her own daughter. Irene Curie, now grown, had inherited her mother's intellect, her father's calm, and more than a little of their stubbornness. Under Marie's guidance, Irene began her own research into radioactivity, eventually marrying physicist Frédéric Joliot. The couple would go on to continue Marie's legacy in ways she couldn't have imagined, but that's a story for another day. For now, Marie watched with quiet pride as her daughter stepped into the spotlight. There was something poetic in it. The woman who had once fought to attend underground lectures in Warsaw now saw her own child lead world-class research in a building bearing her name. Still, the physical toll could not be ignored. Her blood counts were irregular, her breathing shallow. She suffered constant infections. Yet Marie continued to travel, fundraising for science, promoting the peaceful use of radium, and sharing her vision of what research could be when it served humanity instead of politics or ego. In 1921, she traveled to the United States, where American women, led by magazine editor Marie Maloney, raised over $100,000 to buy her a single gram of radium for research. They called her Madame Curie, and treated her not as a scandalous outsider or eccentric widow, but as a hero. She was received at the White House by President Harding himself. But even then, when praised, she remained modest. She didn't talk about herself, she talked about the science, the cancer treatments, the diagnostics, the possibilities. Marie never saw herself as exceptional. She simply believed that if you had the tools to help the world, it was your duty to use them. And yet she was exceptional. She had survived poverty, xenophobia, heartbreak, betrayal, and war. She had worked in freezing attics, in bombed hospitals, in labs filled with invisible danger. And through it all, she had never stopped asking questions. But time was catching up. By the late 1930s, her body was in steady decline. She could no longer read for long hours. Her bones had become fragile. Her white blood cells had nearly collapsed. She was suffering from what would later be diagnosed as aplastic anemia, a rare condition in which the body stops producing blood cells, almost certainly caused by prolonged radiation exposure. Her notebooks, lab tools, and even her furniture were so contaminated with radiation that they remain radioactive to this day, stored in lead-lined boxes. And still, she worked. Until her final weeks, she remained active at the Institute. She checked students' papers, reviewed experiments, encouraged young women to push forward no matter what anyone said. In her quiet, precise way, she kept building something that would outlast her, a world where science belonged to everyone. Marie Curie died in 1934 in a small sanitarium in the French Alps. No final speech, no fanfare, just the soft silence of someone who had already said everything worth saying, in radium, in resistance, in relentless pursuit of truth. But her story was not over, because when Marie Curie left the world, she left behind something far more powerful than glowing metal. She left a blueprint for how to be brave, how to be brilliant, and how to never, ever ask permission. Marie Curie died in 1934 in a modest clinic in the French Alps. The cause was aplastic anemia, most likely the result of long-term exposure to ionizing radiation. At that time, the connection between chronic radiation exposure and illness was still poorly understood. Her own research had helped uncover some of those dangers, though far too late to protect herself. There was no state funeral, no immediate public outcry, just a quiet farewell to a person who had spent most of her life trying to avoid attention, even as her work attracted worldwide recognition. And yet, the impact of her life extended far beyond the laboratory. The discoveries made in that worn-down shed in Paris, radium and polonium, laid the foundation for the field of nuclear physics. The methods she developed for isolating radioactive isotopes became standard in both physics and medical research. The very word radioactivity, which appears in textbooks across the globe, was coined in her notes. The Radium Institute, which opened in 1914, became one of the most important centers for medical research in Europe. It offered space for physicists, chemists, and physicians to collaborate on cancer treatment using radioactive substances, a field that has since saved countless lives. Marie Curie never patented her discoveries. She made no effort to monetize radium, despite its soaring value on the commercial market. At one point, a single gram of purified radium was worth more than diamonds. Still, she refused to profit from it, insisting that science must serve the public good. In 1921, American women raised over $100,000 to buy Curie a gram of radium for her research. It was presented to her by President Warren Harding during a visit to the White House. The gesture was a rare moment of recognition, not for fame, but for practical support of ongoing scientific work. The legacy extended through her family as well. Irène Joliot-Curie, her daughter, and Frédéric Joliot, her son-in-law, continued research in nuclear chemistry and were later awarded the Nobel Prize in 1935. This made the Curies the first family in history with 5 Nobel Prizes across 2 generations. Marie Curie's personal laboratory notebooks remain radioactive to this day. Anyone wishing to view them must wear protective clothing and sign health disclaimers. The items she handled routinely, notebooks, furniture, lab instruments, are stored in lead-lined boxes. This is not symbolism. It is a measurable legacy, still active, still present. During her lifetime, Curie faced exclusion from institutions, resistance from colleagues, and outright hostility in the press. Early in her career, she was denied academic appointments due to her gender. Later, during the so-called Langevin affair, newspapers sought to discredit her personally rather than engage with her work professionally. These challenges were not exceptional. They were typical for women in science at the time. What makes her legacy stand out is not dramatic heroism, but consistency, careful experimentation, meticulous documentation, reluctance to speculate, a preference for clarity over charisma. She built her reputation slowly, through evidence and precision. She trained others, especially women, with the same methodical discipline. Her strength lay in persistence, in the choice to continue despite discomfort, rejection, or fatigue. Modern medicine relies daily on tools that descend directly from Curie's work. X-ray imaging, radiation therapy, radio tracers and diagnostics. These technologies did not emerge from a single dramatic breakthrough. but from years of detailed, sometimes exhausting research. Marie Curie did not see herself as exceptional. In interviews, she often credited teamwork, cooperation, and the shared goals of the scientific community. When asked how she endured public criticism, she said only that personal matters were irrelevant to the work. In today's world of rapid media and constant visibility, such restraint is rare, but perhaps that's the point. Curie demonstrated that it's possible to make permanent contributions to science without seeking recognition, that it's possible to teach, to build institutions, to prepare the next generation, and to leave behind not fame, but infrastructure. Thanks for listening to the story of Marie Curie, a scientist, a teacher, a builder of systems that still serve people today. If this story gave you something to think about, consider subscribing and share it with someone who still believes science belongs to everyone. While Marie Curie built her career in collaboration with institutions and peers, another kind of mind was working quietly in the margins. No laboratory team, no international foundation. Just one person, a desk, and an idea that refused to go away. Nikola Tesla was born in 1856 in a small village called Smiljan, then part of the Austrian Empire, now Croatia. His father served as a Serbian Orthodox priest. His mother, though formally uneducated, had a sharp memory and a gift for mechanical invention. Household tools, egg beaters, water pumps, she built and repaired them all. No one recorded her designs, no patents, no lectures. But that early exposure to creativity without recognition would leave a lasting impression. As a child, Tesla experienced vivid sensory episodes, flashes of light, overwhelming visions, and moments of intense concentration that bordered on trance. Today, some might call it synesthesia or temporal lobe epilepsy. At the time, it was simply strange. Local children avoided him. Teachers misunderstood him. But instead of withdrawing, he turned inward and began to build machines in his head. In his own notes, Tesla later claimed he could picture every detail of an invention mentally, adjusting its dimensions and function without ever picking up a pencil. He saw no need for sketches. According to him, the prototype existed fully formed before his hands ever touched metal. Formal schooling, however, didn't come easily. After surviving a near-fatal illness in his teens, a moment he later described as pivotal, Tesla was sent to the Technical University in Graz, where he studied mathematics, physics, and electrical engineering. It was there that he first encountered a device called the Graham dynamo, a generator that could be reversed to function as a motor. Most students accepted its limitations. Tesla did not. While others saw a machine that worked well enough, he saw something wasteful, a design problem. The brushes and commutators used to reverse current created sparks and heat, and in his mind, unnecessary friction. He began thinking about alternating current, a system where electricity could oscillate back and forth, reducing energy loss. At the time, the electrical world was ruled by direct current. It was stable, predictable, and already in use. Alternating current sounded elegant on paper, but no one had a working system to deliver it. Tesla believed it was possible, but no professor supported the idea. Eventually, he left Graz without a degree. Over the next few years, Tesla drifted between cities, jobs, and personal crises. In Budapest, he suffered what today might be called a nervous breakdown. In Paris, he worked for the Continental Edison Company, helping troubleshoot power systems. The job offered practical experience, but few opportunities for creativity. Still, it gave him something critical, a recommendation. In 1884, Tesla arrived in New York City with a letter of introduction to Thomas Edison. The two men could not have been more different. Edison believed in trial and error, often testing hundreds of materials before settling on a solution. Tesla preferred mental calculation and precision. Edison was pragmatic, profit-oriented, and focused on short-term implementation. Tesla, in contrast, focused on long-term systems, guided more by physics than by market trends. Edison offered a challenge: improve one of his direct current generators and receive a bonus. Tesla completed the task within weeks. The promised payment never came. Whether through miscommunication or intention, the result was the same. Tesla resigned. The departure marked the beginning of a long pattern. Institutions would notice Tesla only when he solved something no one else could, but just as quickly they would move on, leaving patents disputed, credit misassigned, and income uncertain. By 1887, he had secured funding to begin work on an induction motor, a machine that could run efficiently using alternating current. Within months, he filed a series of patents that described a complete AC power system: generators, transformers, motors, and transmission lines. The designs were not theoretical. They were functional, simple, elegant, and scalable. Soon after, industrialist George Westinghouse took interest. Unlike Edison, Westinghouse understood the potential of AC. He licensed Tesla's patents and hired him as a consultant. At last, a working model of alternating current was ready to challenge the established order, and the world was on the edge of what would soon be called the War of the Currents. By the time Nikola Tesla boarded the ship to America in 1884, the idea of alternating current was already forming in complete, usable fragments, not as theory, but as system. That system included not just motors, but generators, transformers, and long-distance transmission. Few engineers at the time thought so far ahead. The destination was New York, a city beginning to electrify. Streets hummed with direct current, wires tangled above sidewalks, and dynamos clattered in basements. At the center of it all stood Thomas Edison, whose name had become almost synonymous with electricity. He had built the first practical incandescent light bulb and installed the first electric grids. For most of the country, Edison's version of power was the only one they had ever seen. Tesla arrived with a letter of recommendation and a reputation for clever problem-solving. The first weeks of employment at the Edison Machine Works were filled with tasks related to motor improvement. According to some accounts, Tesla redesigned several components of Edison's DC generators, increasing efficiency and reducing maintenance needs. There was, however, little common ground beyond engineering. Edison favored direct experimentation and rapid results, often working around rather than through scientific theory. Tesla approached invention like a physicist: abstract models first, then design. One story, likely exaggerated in later retellings, claims Edison offered a $50,000 bonus for a specific improvement, then dismissed Tesla's success as a misunderstanding. Whether the offer was ever made remains unclear. What is certain, the relationship ended quickly, and Tesla walked away. In the months that followed, work was hard to find. With little money and no institutional support, Tesla took on physical labor, ditch digging, wiring jobs, just to survive. Several of his early patents during this time focused on arc lighting systems, which were gaining popularity in public spaces. None were commercial successes. Then came the pivotal moment. A group of investors, led by attorney Charles Peck and Alfred Brown, decided to fund Tesla's vision for a working alternating current motor. With financial backing and a rented workshop in Manhattan, Tesla returned to what mattered: invention. By 1888, the AC induction motor was ready. It was simple, efficient, and durable. Unlike DC motors, which required brushes and commutators, Tesla's motor had no contact surfaces that sparked or wore down. It worked using electromagnetic fields, rotating in perfect synchrony with alternating current. That same year, Tesla presented his system at a meeting of the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. The reaction was cautious, but intrigued. A few months later, George Westinghouse, already a major figure in railway systems and steam engines, bought the patents and offered Tesla a consulting contract. The partnership between Tesla and Westinghouse brought alternating current into the industrial spotlight. Westinghouse Electric Company had the infrastructure, capital, and manufacturing capabilities to scale production. Tesla's designs provided the core technology. Together, they proposed a bold idea: a national power grid based on alternating current. Energy could be generated in one location and sent hundreds of miles without significant loss. Transformers could adjust voltage levels for safe delivery. It was cheaper, more efficient, and better suited for long-distance use than Edison's DC systems. Naturally, this triggered opposition. Edison launched a public campaign against AC, arguing it was unsafe. Pamphlets warned of household electrocution. Newspapers printed dramatic stories. Even staged electrocutions of animals were conducted to demonstrate the dangers of high-voltage AC power. These tactics, later referred to as the War of the Currents, marked one of the earliest large-scale PR battles in American industry. Tesla did not respond publicly. That was not his nature. Westinghouse handled the business and media. The inventor returned to the workshop, refining circuits, improving safety, and preparing for a test that would silence critics or vindicate them. In 1893, that opportunity came in the form of the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. The Westinghouse Company won the contract to power the entire fair using Tesla's AC system. Over 27 million people attended. For the first time, the public saw entire buildings lit safely and effectively with alternating current. The demonstration was a turning point. Overnight, public opinion shifted. Alternating current wasn't just theory anymore. It lit fountains, powered moving walkways, ran printing presses. Tesla's system had worked, not in a lab, but on a citywide stage. Within a few years, the Westinghouse Tesla model would be used to design the Niagara Falls Power Project, the first major hydroelectric plant in North America. From there, AC became the standard. The war for electrical dominance was over. The grid model still used today began with that set of patents, that exposition, and a quiet inventor who rarely attended his own celebrations. After the triumph at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, the case for alternating current was no longer academic. The system designed by Tesla and implemented by Westinghouse had successfully powered an entire exposition, including lights, motors, and displays, without failures, fires, or electrocutions. But the battle wasn't over. In public, the rivalry between AC and DC became personal. Edison, unwilling to concede ground, continued to frame alternating current as a threat. Pamphlets described AC lines as death wires. Newspaper illustrations depicted children fried by invisible forces. In one of the most notorious public spectacles, animals, including dogs and even an elephant, were electrocuted with AC current to demonstrate its danger. The effort backfired. It was gruesome, and increasingly, the public began to see through the showmanship. What mattered more was performance. The following year, attention shifted to Niagara Falls, the largest hydropower opportunity on the continent. The challenge was immense. Harness the power of the falls, convert it into usable electricity, and transmit that power over 20 miles to the industrial city of Buffalo, New York. Multiple companies competed for the contract. Direct current, with its limited transmission range, was ill-suited for the task. Alternating current offered a better solution, if someone could prove it could work at that scale. Westinghouse, using Tesla's patents and system designs, won the bid. Construction began in 1895, and the generators, based on Tesla's rotating field principle, were soon operational. By 1896, Buffalo's streetlights glowed with power drawn from moving water and delivered through AC lines. This moment marked a shift in the electrical world. Not only had Tesla's vision proven superior, it had become infrastructure. Today, nearly every power system on Earth operates using alternating current, yet recognition remained inconsistent. While Westinghouse Electric expanded and investors celebrated rising profits, Tesla moved on. His interests had shifted from motors and generators to a more ambitious problem: wireless power transmission. The principle seemed logical. Electricity and magnetism were already known to propagate through space as electromagnetic waves. Radio was just beginning to emerge as a viable technology. Guglielmo Marconi, building on work by Hertz and others, had sent and received simple Morse signals over short distances. Tesla believed more was possible, that entire electrical systems could function without physical conductors. Experiments in high-frequency currents and resonant circuits began taking over his lab. The Tesla coil, one of the most iconic devices bearing his name, was not just a novelty. It was a tool designed to investigate voltage, frequency, and wireless transmission limits. Early tests showed promise. Arcs of electricity leapt through air with startling intensity. Lamps lit without wires. Sparks reached across rooms. Tesla believed that with the right conditions, energy could be transmitted globally, available to anyone, anywhere. This idea wasn't just technical, it was philosophical. Tesla saw electricity as a natural force, like gravity or sunlight, and argued that it should be accessible to all, not metered and sold. In an era where industrialists were building monopolies, the concept of free global energy was radical. Investors were cautious. Westinghouse, facing financial pressure from the AC rollout, renegotiated Tesla's contract. In a move that's still debated, Tesla voluntarily relinquished his royalties on each motor sold. Some view this as idealism, others see it as a tactical error. In either case, the potential wealth, estimated in modern terms to be hundreds of millions, was gone. Tesla focused instead on the next stage. A laboratory in Colorado Springs was built in 1899, designed to test large-scale wireless systems. It was isolated, spacious, and far enough from populated areas to safely conduct high-voltage experiments. There, towers hummed with energy, and artificial lightning danced across the plains. Witnesses described sparks over 100 feet long. Measurements taken during those experiments would later contribute to early theories in ionospheric physics, but funding was unstable and data remained unpublished. Few people outside Tesla's circle understood what was happening. In the public imagination, Tesla was becoming something else, not just an inventor but a magician. Newspapers began describing him with curiosity rather than certainty. Diagrams gave way to metaphors. Electricity became spectacle. That shift marked a turning point. From this point forward, the inventions became more ambitious, the support less reliable. By the turn of the century, the Tesla laboratory in Colorado Springs had become a strange landmark. Locals occasionally saw flashes from the hill, sometimes mistaken for lightning or distant cannon fire. On quiet nights, arcs of blue light lit the sky, and static filled nearby telephone lines. The experiments were serious. The goal was to test wireless transmission of power over long distances, not just communication signals, but usable energy. The design centered around resonance, the idea that a properly tuned system could amplify and transmit electrical energy through the Earth's surface or the atmosphere itself. The lab was fitted with a massive coil, one of the largest ever built. During one test, voltage climbed into the millions. Bolts of artificial lightning leapt from the dome. A nearby transformer station burned out. The entire town lost power. Tesla apologized, but privately saw it as confirmation that his theory had real-world potential. In his notes, he recorded observations of standing waves, stationary electrical patterns that, if confirmed, would support the idea that energy could circle the globe under the right conditions. Some of these ideas were ahead of available mathematics. Others remain unverified, but the work attracted attention. In addition to transmitting messages, the tower was designed to send power, not just to nearby receivers, but to distant stations across oceans. This was not included in the original proposal. When Tesla explained the full scope, the reaction was cold. A system that transmitted electricity without meters, without wires, without billing, did not align with Morgan's business model. No more funds were provided. Construction slowed. Public confidence faltered. As Marconi sent the first transatlantic radio signal using a simpler, less costly setup, Tesla's project appeared stalled and increasingly outdated. Newspapers began reporting delays. Skepticism grew. Morgan withdrew support entirely. The tower was never completed. Its core systems were never activated at full scale. Some components were tested, others remained theoretical. What remains debated is how close the technology came to success. During this period, Tesla's public appearances became less frequent. He no longer engaged with the press as directly. Behind closed doors, work continued on new devices, turbines, oscillators, wireless lamps, many of which were quietly patented but never commercialized. Visitors to the Wardenclyffe site described an unusual atmosphere. Machinery stood idle, diagrams covered walls, assistants came and went. Tesla spoke rarely about setbacks, preferring to discuss principles, not results. In 1917, the tower was demolished for scrap. The site, once envisioned as a node in a global energy network, was silent. Tesla's finances were in decline. Years of self-funded research, unpaid consulting, and discontinued royalties left few resources. Living conditions became modest. Equipment aged. Letters requesting support often went unanswered. Still, notebooks filled with ideas. Designs for vertical takeoff aircraft, reflections on cosmic energy, a unified theory of physical forces. Many of these projects remained undeveloped, sometimes for lack of funding, sometimes due to scientific limits of the era. Even so, influence continued to ripple outward. Physicists studying high-frequency fields referenced Tesla's early observations. Electrical engineers adapted coil principles for radio and medical imaging. In classrooms, his name appeared less in textbooks than in footnotes, but the imprint was there. Not as brand, not as celebrity, as infrastructure. And despite isolation, respect lingered in scientific circles. Those who had studied under Tesla or worked alongside him remembered clarity, accuracy, and discipline. Nothing speculative, nothing wasted. The laboratory may have been quiet, the currents less so. The Wardenclyffe Tower was never meant to be just another laboratory. Built on a flat stretch of land on Long Island, the site represented a bold attempt to redesign how energy moved through the world. Instead of metal wires strung across poles, the tower was designed to send electricity and information through the air, reaching ships, cities, even continents. The core principle was resonant induction. Energy would be broadcast from a central node, received by tuned systems placed anywhere within range. No fuel needed, no grid, a wireless infrastructure for the planet. Construction began with promise. A 100-foot shaft was dug straight into the earth. Steel grounding plates were laid. The tower itself rose nearly 200 feet, topped with a copper dome and surrounded by a ring of antennas. Beneath the surface, tunnels and chambers waited for high-voltage equipment. Tesla described the design as scalable, a prototype for a worldwide system. Funding came from J.P. Morgan, who agreed to finance the project under the assumption it would transmit wireless messages, a business competitor to Marconi. Early letters from Tesla mention worldwide communication, but say little about power transmission. That part was explained later. Morgan declined further investment. By 1903, construction slowed. Material shipments stopped. Technicians were dismissed. The tower stood, half-active, as Tesla scrambled to find new backers. Several approached, but none committed. Investor confidence had shifted toward smaller, more predictable systems. Marconi had sent a simple wireless signal across the Atlantic using minimal equipment, practical, cheap, and proven. Tesla's design, by comparison, looked speculative, expensive, ambitious beyond measure. Public understanding didn't help. The press often described the project in vague terms: Tesla's mystery tower, or invisible lightning machine. Without a working demonstration, headlines outpaced facts. Meanwhile, financial pressure mounted. Tesla began liquidating assets. Patents were sold to cover debts. Even equipment from earlier experiments was pawned. The Wardenclyffe lab never broadcast energy. The tower never lit a distant city. It stood for 14 years, then was quietly dismantled in 1917. The property was sold for debt, the structure torn down for scrap. No farewell ceremony, no technical report. Only silent photographs remain, a skeletal dome above a brick base, and empty coils that never sparked. The failure marked a turning point. From that moment forward, Tesla operated without formal backing. No labs, no staff, no major manufacturing. He shifted to hotel rooms, where experiments continued on a smaller scale. Prototypes fit inside suitcases. Notes were handwritten on stationery from the Waldorf Astoria, then later from Hotel Pennsylvania, and finally Hotel New Yorker. Some projects were practical: compact turbines, air blast circuits, radio-controlled boats. Others ventured into speculative territory: directed energy weapons, earth-resonant amplifiers, machines that claimed to draw energy from ambient atmospheric forces. Patents slowed. Funding requests increased. Most went unanswered. Despite financial decline, Tesla's daily routine stayed structured. Early mornings, long walks, coffee at exact times, conversations limited, interviews avoided unless carefully arranged. Public appearances were rare but deliberate. In each, technical clarity remained. He didn't sell dreams, he described mechanisms. Still, the image changed. Where once the press saw a rival to Edison, now they saw a reclusive thinker with unfinished towers and unwritten books. By 1931, Tesla appeared on the cover of Time magazine, commemorating his 75th birthday. Colleagues submitted tributes. Letters from scientific institutions arrived, praising contributions to electromagnetism and energy systems. But these were gestures, not investments. No new lab was built, no new tower approved, no large-scale implementation resumed. Even as recognition returned, resources did not. In private, correspondence revealed frustration. Letters to old associates asked for support, not for personal comfort, but to continue work. Notes to editors corrected technical inaccuracies. Diagrams, sketched by hand, still reflected new ideas: improved vacuum tubes, beam transmissions, low-loss electrical storage. But time was running out. The tower had fallen. The world had moved on toward centralized grids, fossil fuel infrastructure, and proprietary communication networks. What remained was not a system, but a blueprint. Many parts of that blueprint would be revisited decades later. Some of it still waits. During the final decades of Tesla's life, attention shifted away from energy systems and toward spectacle. The man who had once lit expositions and moved rivers now lived in New York hotels, carrying notebooks instead of blueprints and working mostly from memory. Hotel rooms replaced laboratories. Conversations became infrequent, sometimes limited to front desk staff and waiters. Correspondence slowed. Some letters were never mailed. By the 1920s, Tesla had become a familiar but distant figure. Journalists occasionally sought him out, often hoping for eccentric quotes or provocative predictions. Some requests were ignored. Others resulted in carefully worded responses, often focused on physics, wireless communication, or the future of humanity. Speculation about new inventions increased, but evidence remained scarce. In public imagination, the line between Tesla, the inventor, and Tesla, the mystery, blurred. Reports claimed he had built an earthquake machine, that he could split the Earth in half, that he received signals from Mars. Tesla rarely denied such claims directly. More often, he redirected the conversation to wave propagation, harmonics, or planetary resonance. The result was confusion and myth. One invention that did exist was a remote-controlled boat, demonstrated as early as 1898. Operated by radio signals, the small craft responded to commands from a control box held by Tesla. Observers struggled to explain the mechanism. Some assumed trickery, others thought it might be telepathic. Few understood that this was one of the world's first demonstrations of wireless control, a foundation for technologies used today in drones, robotics, and automated systems. But without commercial interest, the idea remained a demonstration. In these years, Tesla continued to submit patent applications, fewer than in the past, but still precise. Devices focused on mechanical resonance, voltage regulation, and turbine efficiency. Most remained on paper. Manufacturers preferred proven systems and more marketable designs. Tesla's reluctance to collaborate or simplify his approach didn't help. Despite increasing financial difficulty, he maintained a sense of routine. Daily walks through Bryant Park, punctual meals, polite but brief conversations. Pigeons became a notable part of this period. He visited them regularly, sometimes feeding them by hand. One white pigeon in particular became a source of emotional focus. In letters and later interviews, Tesla referred to it as more than an animal, as a presence that brought peace in a time of mental exhaustion. At birthdays, media attention would briefly return. On his 75th, he spoke to reporters about harnessing cosmic energy and reducing warfare through technological balance. On his 80th, he predicted future transportation systems, including flying machines and wireless global networks. The tone was often forward-looking, but behind the optimism, there was a note of distance. Scientific journals referenced his earlier work respectfully. Government agencies archived his patents. Academic circles occasionally invited him to events. Most declined. No university offered a position. No institution reopened his research in full. Interest existed, but not commitment. Tesla's influence, meanwhile, could be seen in places where his name was rarely mentioned. Electrical engineers applied his coil designs in radio and X-ray systems. Power systems used his principles for long-distance transmission. The polyphase motor became standard in industry, but the face of innovation had changed. New names filled headlines: Einstein, Bohr, Fermi. In 1937, Tesla was hit by a car while crossing the street. Injuries included broken ribs and internal bleeding. Hospital care was refused. Recovery took place alone, in a darkened room. Health declined afterward, gradually, but steadily. The final residence was room 3327 of the Hotel New Yorker. Quiet, window-facing, with a desk and a modest collection of papers. Visitors were few. Income came mostly from a modest Yugoslavian government pension. Even then, ideas continued to appear in notebooks. Fragments of equations, sketches of energy systems, speculative models for planetary resonance. Some pages contained only single lines of thought, incomplete but intentional. Tesla died on January 7, 1943, at the age of 86. No immediate family, no public announcement. A maid discovered the body 2 days later. Funeral arrangements were made by friends and a few government representatives. Ashes were later interred in Belgrade. The death passed quietly. Newspapers offered short obituaries. A few editorials reflected on past achievements. Most headlines moved on quickly. But silence didn't mean disappearance. Nikola Tesla died without wealth, without formal titles, and without a working laboratory. But over time, the world he tried to build, piece by piece, began to take shape. The devices now used to light homes, power factories, and move information across the globe rely on principles Tesla had described decades earlier. Alternating current, once ridiculed, became the global standard. The polyphase motor, one of his early innovations, remains a central component in modern electrical systems. Hospitals, communication networks, and transit infrastructure all operate with technologies shaped by his original designs. Shortly after his death in 1943, the U.S. government seized his belongings under wartime security protocols. The Office of Alien Property Custodian collected trunks filled with notebooks, circuit diagrams, and experimental records from his hotel room. Much of the material was eventually reviewed, archived, and later returned to Yugoslavia. Some documents remain restricted or lost. Rumors about classified inventions and suppressed technologies spread quickly. Most were exaggerations, but a few discoveries, including high-frequency systems and advanced amplifiers, have since been reconsidered in light of modern physics. Over the following decades, recognition returned slowly. In 1960, the International System of Units named the unit of magnetic flux density the Tesla, a scientific gesture that finally placed his name alongside volt, watt, and ohm. Museums were opened, streets renamed, statues erected. In his homeland and later globally, Tesla was reframed not as an outlier, but as a pioneer whose time simply arrived too early. Interest accelerated in the 21st century. Enthusiasts, historians, and engineers revisited patents and notebooks. A cultural reappraisal followed. Tesla became the subject of biographies, documentaries, and academic conferences. Companies adopted his name. Fictional versions appeared in films and games. Some tributes leaned into the myth, others tried to correct it. But the real legacy isn't symbolic, it's structural. The transmission towers outside cities, the induction coils inside devices, the alternating signals carried through modern power grids, all traceable to a consistent pattern of work, elegant, scalable, and based on the belief that science could serve everyone. Tesla's approach wasn't driven by market needs. There were no quarterly goals, no product launches. Many of his concepts were systems, not objects. He described energy as a shared resource, not a commodity. That idea, considered naive at the time, now echoes in global conversations about sustainability, decentralization, and open access. He rarely protected ideas for personal profit. Many patents were allowed to expire. Others were surrendered when companies struggled. The result was a body of work that became public domain earlier than most, freely available, widely adopted. When engineers examine circuits or analyze electromagnetic fields, the mathematics often returns to formulations he introduced. The inventor's own name may not be cited, but the influence is embedded in the methods. In educational settings, Tesla is now taught as a central figure in electrical theory. His rivalry with Edison, once reduced to anecdote, is framed more fully, not as a battle of personalities, but as a difference in vision. One focused on control and commercial success, the other on potential. Neither path was wrong, but only one aimed to eliminate the barriers between discovery and distribution. Near the end of his life, Tesla wrote that the future would belong to thinkers who prefer ideas to wealth, truth to popularity. At the time, that sounded like resignation. In retrospect, it reads as instruction. The world changed, not with applause, but with quiet integration. Not in headlines, but in voltage. Not through monuments, but through design. There are no glowing vials to mark the progress, no ceremonies at the moment a system turns on, but in every motor spinning in a hospital, every signal crossing the sky without wires, and every classroom where resonance is explained without explanation of its origin, the presence remains. Thanks for listening to the untold life of Nikola Tesla. A life not built for crowds, but for circuits. Not built for approval, but for alignment between what was possible and what was finally made real. If this story left you thinking, consider sharing it, and remembering that silence isn't the absence of power. Sometimes it's where it starts.